very good morning to you all, and you're very welcome to this week's Signpost webinar. I hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. This series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network, and Dairy Food Drink Ireland Skillnet. And we have Pat Murphy, head of the Teagasc Environment KT Programme, assisting us with questions. Good morning to you, Pat.
Morning.
And just before we introduce our main guests, I just want to talk about the main issue that we're going to be speaking about today is the use of anthelmintic products, and internal parasites we know are a major challenge to grass-based production systems across the world, and parasite control is largely based on suppression using what are called anthelmintic products or drugs. However, there is growing concern around the emergence of drug-resistant parasites, and one man who is leading the charge to combat anthelmintic resistance is Bruce Thompson, who is a dairy farmer based in Ballyfin, County Laois. And today, Bruce is going to speak to us about protecting dung beetles while managing parasites. So, Bruce, you're very welcome to the Signpost webinar series.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Pat. How are we doing?
Great.
All well down in County Laois this morning?
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, look, we got a little bit of rain there the weekend, so the place is looking a little bit greener than it did a week ago anyway. So yeah, hopefully that'll get things moving again. Yeah.
I think everybody is planning their summer holidays is probably hoping for a bit of dry weather, so it could be a bit of a conflict there. But Bruce, could you tell us a little bit about your setup there in Laois? It's Ballyfin, isn't it?
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah. We're milking dairy cows here in a spring calving system. It's conventional type, so we're calving our cows in a 9-week period and maximizing the production from grass. So look, I suppose I came home and farming in 2003. At the time, there was 54 cows on the farm, and my dad had lost 48 of those with tuberculosis. So I suppose animal health was always a big scarring on our minds at the time, and has kind of stuck with us. So look, since the quota abolitions, then we've pushed on to 300 cows this year. So yeah, I suppose that's kind of a bit about ourselves. We keep all the young stock on the farm as well. So half of our farm is now owned and half is rented. So that's our business today.
Very good. And this time 20 years ago, could you have imagined yourself speaking about dung beetles on a webinar?
I'd say if you were to go back 5 years, Pat, I wouldn't have, or even maybe 2.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what a webinar was 5 years ago, Pat. So,
so what brought you to this, and what led to your interest in dung beetles? And you completed a Nuffield scholarship recently. Maybe you just explain what's involved there as well.
Yeah. So what created me interest? Well, I was on a safari down in South Africa. It was over 10 years ago with my then girlfriend, now wife, and we saw this big telecropid, which is the big rollers that you see David Attenborough showing on National Geographic, rolling a big ball of elephant poo across the plain. And I was absolutely fascinated and thought, wouldn't it be a great addition if we had dung beetles in Ireland to bury the dung into the soil at the roots of the grass? And thought no more of it. And fast forward on a few years, myself and Dad were with the intensification on the farm, we found ourselves dosing calves more, worming calves more, and decided that that there was something maybe not clicking 100% right, and it seemed to be the accepted management strategy at the time. But we started taking a more of a diagnostic approach from that day on. And a chance conversation then with Dr. Sally Ann Spence, an entomologist over in the UK, about dung beetles. She actually said that there was dung beetles on my farm, even though I didn't know about it, and that the fact that I had reduced my wormers meant that I was probably having to worm animals less because they were getting rid of the parasite eggs out of the dung pats. And I went out to my paddock in excitement just to see, was this true? And lo and behold, here was dung beetles working away on under third, Mark.
I like it. I like it.
That got me interested in the whole helmet, the parasite control of aspect of with dung beetles. So I did a bit of research into it and got very engrossed in it, and decided to further find out about it, to scratch the itch, I suppose.
Right.
Right for scholarship, and it was absolutely fantastic to get it, that I could research this further. So that was
brilliant. Well, look, we'll ask you to share your screen with us. You have a short presentation for us to tell us about your I suppose journey so far with this subject, and I know that you have some really excellent slides, so I'm looking forward to it. Just to remind everybody that if you have a question for Bruce, you can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and also today's session is being recorded, and Bruce's presentation will also be available on the Teagasc website. And if you are hard of hearing, we have the live transcription running there at the bottom of your screen. If you do find a distraction, you can switch it off at any stage if you wish to do that. So Bruce, we'll hand over to you, and look forward to the Q&A afterwards. We can see your screen perfectly there as well.
Okay. And can you hear me as well, Mark?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, just doing an acoustics check. So here we go. These are dung beetles, and I'm going to speak to you today about how they're affected by anthelmintics and how they actually reduce parasite loadings. So here's the very first dung beetle I was talking about. I was so enthralled by it that I took a photograph of it. So that guy changed me my perspective on things. And that's a little bit about the Nuffield. I'm a 2020 scholar. I'm very, very thankful to Nuffield Ireland for investing a lot of the resources into me to investigate this topic. As I'm a 2020 scholar, I didn't get to do much traveling. However, I did get to do a bit in last March around South Australia and Tasmania, to investigate the dung beetles there. So we're looking at dung pats as being a noxious weed sitting on top of the soil. And we need to get them into the grass, where they're a nutrient-rich source, right at the roots. But the dung pats are full of all sorts of flora and fauna, as you can see from this picture. They're all coprophagous, which means that they feed on feces. And the more that they feed on the feces, the quicker they degrade into the soil. So these are important for nutrient recycling and for the destruction of the dung pat. The one I'm focusing on, of course, is the dung beetle. So in dung beetles, we've two general types. So we don't have those rollers in Ireland. We've two general types. We have the dwellers that live in the dung pats, and they lay their eggs in the dung pats and hatch in it. And then we have the tunnelers, and they actually dig holes into the ground and lay their eggs in the soil. Now, this is a positive feedback loop. So these guys, if they're encouraged, they have benefits to farmers. They reduce the parasite and fly loadings on pasture. And as I hit on there, they're an important source for, or important part of the breakdown of the dung pat. So you'll have more efficient nutrient recycling, because the dung pat's broken down quicker. There's less nitrogen lost to the atmosphere. It might sound small fry, but it all adds up. There's less risk of the dung pat being lost to the atmosphere. And I mentioned there, I went down to Australia and Tasmania. One of the reasons that they actually imported beetles and bred them in that country, that was why I travelled there. They had an awful problem with, well, A, flies, and B, pasture fouling. They actually had a high percentage of their pasture land covered in dung pats prior to importing these beetles. Why did they have to import them? Well, in Australia, they imported cattle and sheep in the late 18th century, but they didn't bring the dung beetles with them. And as farming intensified throughout the 19th century, that they found these dung paths were sitting around for years before they actually literally dried up and disappeared. The dung beetles, so they don't actually eat the dung path, they actually drink it. They drink the juices out of it, and in doing so, they dehydrate it. If you go to a half degraded dung path and dig it up with a spade, you will see that it's completely alive with earthworms. The earthworms actually, they're the ones that really do the work. But the problem is the dung paths are too wet and sloppy when they're fresh. They taste like SH20 when they're fresh. So the dung beetles dry them out to prepare them for encroachment by the earthworms and bring it into the soil. And then the dung beetles themselves are also a transport service. They're a taxi for phoretic mites, and I will talk about them in a second. The benefits to the environment then. So the dung beetles, in reducing the amount of dung paths that are on pasture and burrowing it into the soil, they're reducing the risk of the of water runoff going into from these dung paths going into waterways. And they are an important food source for predators. Bats are a big one, but small birds, coal tits as well. And I believe that buzzards actually eat the big geotropies. They're the burrowers. I haven't seen that happen yet, but I'm told they do. There are species that deserve recognition in their own right. So there's a lot of them in the country. We don't really realise them. Farmers tell me that they don't have dung beetles on their farm. They do have dung beetles on the farm. They're just in small numbers. So yeah, here's a paper that's written by Max Anderson. He's doing a PhD over in the UK, and he's looking at how different grazing strategies affect the amount of dung beetles and the type of dung beetles, and what effect that has on bat species. So you can see even a small difference between a lay and a permanent pasture, that we've seen a different passing of bats over those fields. Over in the UK then, Brian Sands in the University of Bristol has done a field experiment on. There's a number of these experiments, but I particularly like Brian's one because it's very real. It's using similar species to what we have in Ireland, if not the same, and it was done in field, so it was open to the weather. And whereas we're seeing in any of these experiments that are done either in lab or out in field, we're seeing reductions of between 0 and 100% in terms of parasites emitting from these, reduction of parasites emitting from these dung paths. Brian is one, which is a very real one, was at about 30% reduction over a 10-week period on grassland. So it's very true that they do reduce gastrointestinal parasites in their animals. The problem is they're a decline in population. So really, we need as many of these dung beetles as possible to process these dung paths. But the problem is the populations of them are declining. So they really are up the creek, I suppose. Why are they declining? Well, the anthelmintics, that's our wormers and synthetic parasites. Those products are very damaging to the populations of the beetles, because not only are they toxic that they kill them, but as these products are leaving the animal over a period of weeks, the persistency has sublethal effects. So in other words, it affects their reproduction capabilities. And then other things are probably smaller effects, but they do have an effect. There's some species will emerge over the winter in the autumn and early spring. But we could have animals taken off fields or have less dung paths around, so they come up and they're basically hungry for food, and it's not there. They don't like high grain diets, and they don't like the liquid dung paths that Bruce has on his farm from his dairy cows. Pasture harrowing and tilling animals doing that's very damaging as well. Or ploughing, in effect, that's particularly damaging to the tunnelers, as you can imagine. The other thing with anthelmintics is we're finding other environmental issues with them. Here was a paper that was released, I think it was last year, by Trinity College. They did a trial on 88 sites around Ireland, and they sampled the water, and on 18% of those sites, it was actually found that there was anthelmintics presence in the water. That was groundwater now, so you're looking at springs and wells, which is worrying. Another effect then was Gillian Gilbert up on the Isle of Islay, which is between Northern Ireland and Scotland, has discovered that one of the main reasons for the chough population declining on the island was the combined use of triclobendazole and synthetic pyrethroids. So that is a wormer. That's actually, triclobendazole is for fluke, and synthetic pyrethroids that you pour on for flies. They're called fly repellents or fly control. That reduced the amount of pupae in the dung pats from dung beetles that the little fledglings were used to feed on to get up to target weight for overwintering. Also, then another threat for the anthelmintics is resistance, and that is becoming more of a problem. Basically, the rule is wherever we look for resistance, we find it. It's just that we're not looking for it. And that was another thing I was looking at down in South Australia, in Tasmania, was the effects that resistance, which is a lot more accelerated down there, the problems that is creating with farmers. So we have farmers there that they're not able to put sheep onto some properties because of a particular parasite called Homunculus contortus. So that beetle that parasite is becoming a problem, but it's getting more of an issue here. We're seeing more so in sheep, but it's starting to creep into cattle now as well. That we're seeing resistance with problems with resistance, and also from next year onwards, we have to look for prescriptions for these products. So we have to demonstrate a need for them. Now, I will like to say at this point, I'm not trying to be Aaron Brockovich. These products are very, very important. I use them on my farm, and I don't think I'll be able to farm in the system that I'm in without anthelmintics. Reducing stocking rates won't affect or won't solve the problem either. So we have to think about this. We have to really concentrate on where we need to use anthelmintics and if we need to use them and what animals they need to be used on. So we need to make sure that these products are going to stay working for us in future. So this is a slide that shows each line is a different animal group, different management group, and we can see here the red line that's typical of what we're doing in Irish farms. So we're looking at we're not really minding the free living stage of the parasites. So we're not considering what the loading is too much for this is for sheep. We're not really considering what the loading is on pasture, but at 5,000 eggs per day with a typical system where we're worming every 21 days, the animals are performing just average is all we can say. Whereas if you look above that, the animals that were given a low parasite burden actually perform better with no anthelmintic being used, rather than the ones with anthelmintics being used on what's typical pasture management. So this is a pilot scheme that a fellow scholar, Rob Howe, is a vet over in LLM Vets over in the UK. And last year he tried out a pilot scheme with a number of farmers. We can see there was none of them here doing any feedback testing before the pilot scheme, and he got 94% of them to actually do fecal egg counts, and 69% of those farmers started using wormers based on the based on the results from the fecal egg counts. And because of that, then there was a massive reduction in the MLs and the MLs are the macrocyclic lactones, and they are one of the most damaging ones to the environment. So they got a massive reduction in the use of macrocyclic lactones. And yeah, as we can see, then we go on here that 63% of the farms use a lungworm vaccine, and it's a fantastic way of ensuring that you don't have to go in with a wormer because of coughing during the middle of the season. It's something maybe we need to work on in this country. We haven't really hit on these lungworms or lungworm vaccines. It's not new science. It's there for a long time, but it's something we need to look at a bit more. There's a lot of issues with coughing and lungworm on farms. So what are we doing on our farm then? We can see here that we look at the calves first on the farm to build resistance. So we look at the calves as being the most problematic when it comes to parasites for two reasons. One is that they actually emit the most amount of parasite eggs because they have no immune system. So they're not suppressing the parasites. They're a real vector for parasites. But the other thing is that they're also the most naive. So they're at the highest risk. So we concentrate on these chaps. The cows have two types of immunity, or the cattle have two types of immunity. They have innate and adaptive. The innate is what they're born with, that's genetic. We won't talk on that too much, only that ICVF are doing a bit of work there, particularly around liver fluke. But it's a real long approach. The real low-hanging fruit here is the adaptive resistance. So that's the resistance that the calf, each individual calf, builds itself when it gets exposed to parasites. And they need to be exposed, but need to be carefully exposed. So overprotecting them using long-acting products is not the answer. So we on our own farm, we use this approach called traffic light grazing, and that's where we map the farm in terms of parasite fouling. So this can be based on calves. So the calves walk as they're grazing around the farm, taking into account that they're leaving high loads of parasites behind them. We mark the paddocks yellow. So that's considered medium risk, and red risk then is when they fail on a fecal egg count test. And we're also noting the parasite, which is important as well for ones that are seasonal, like lungworm, for example. So we need to keep the calves moved. So they're moved. The calves only get 3 days allocation of grass, and they're back fenced. So we invested a lot in portable equipment, and we've no designated calf paddock. Those calf paddocks, they have to go. They're a big problem. So you can see the type of portable equipment we're using: water troughs, and this is something that I made with my farm manager. It's a pipe reeler for rolling up water pipes. And then taking into account then where the contamination is in the pasture itself. So we can see here from this slide that the highest level of infected stage larvae is down in the bottom 5 centimeters of grass. So therefore we don't want to be grazing calves down tight. So we actually for the calves, particularly for the first half of the season, we graze them on heavier covers. So we're going to do a cover of about 2,000. Also, I suppose not related, the summer scour syndrome is not a problem when you're grazing grass. Not so much a problem when you're grazing grass like this. The calf's rumen is not fully developed, so stronger grass is probably better for them anyway. This is only done with the calves. I will make that point. And as the season goes on, then we tighten them up. We're actually doing our own fecal egg counts, but there's plenty of labs around the country and that provide the service. it's not expensive and it's not hard to do. There's nothing complicated about it. So the diagnostics then tell us when we need to dose. So we go in then to the calves, and we're looking at there's an industry rule, it's called the 80-20 rule, and that is that 80% of the parasites are in 20% of the animals. So we're looking, you really want to focus on getting that 20%. The top animals in the herd don't need to be wormed, generally speaking. So the first point to make is the right product. So we're looking, as it's a dairy farm here, we're looking at using levazimole first in the calves because we can't use that in lactating animals. So we're trying to hedge our bets on keeping the macrocyclic lactones and the benzimidazole for later on. So yeah, the right time, that's to do with the FECs. So the right amount, very important to know the weight of the calves and get that correct. Refugia then, that's a safe refuge for parasites that we know are susceptible to the wormer. So you're going to get that when you don't worm all the animals in the group. So basically what that means is if you take an animal and you worm it, and you have, say, 10% of the worms in that event actually survive in the animal, that 10% are potentially resistant to the product. So the gene pool created by that 10% can be quite damaging. So we need that gene pool to be diluted down by the genes of the parasites that are in animals that weren't dosed, if that makes sense. So basically what we need to do is keep parasites on the farm that we know are susceptible to wormers, and we can keep those in animals that are not being affected. So we're weighing the calves, and we're looking at target weights in the calves based on performance, previous weights, and genetic disposition. So after the worm dose then, these calves go out onto what we call the dump paddock. And this paddock is used solely for the purpose of putting the calves on after they're dosed. So they wanted this for 2 to 3 days, and they expel the highest concentration of wormer out onto these paddocks. So that means that as those products, as I was saying, are damaging to dung beetles, we're trying to keep that in one spot, and it's an area that doesn't get used too often. So it's kind of concentrating the problem into one area rather than diluting it around. I will say last week we went in our first worm into the calves, and 50% of them were worm dosed, and the rest of them were all fine. That was out of, I think, with 83 there in that event. In terms then of flight control, to get away from our synthetic pyrethroids, which is our fly repellents, we are using more. We're putting on our hemp underpants, and we're using these alternative products. So with Stockholm tar and eucalyptus oil, they are more earnest to put on. I've been using these now for 3 years, and I've actually been getting better results from them based on the amount of heifers coming into the parlour with blind quarters. We've had no summertime mastitis. We haven't had that in years anyway, admittedly, even with the synthetic pyrethroids. So the problem with this is you have to go more often with it, and it's a pain to put on. And there's my wife's radiator roller, which she now knows where it is. And all of this then leads to the milking cow herd. So my milking cow herd haven't been wormed since 2017 at any point. And the milk elisa testing, that's the antibody levels of astrotagia, which is a stomach worm. The readings for that in the milk tank haven't been rising. Now it's a young herd, so its performance hasn't been realised yet. So our fertility figures haven't been affected, and our milk solids have actually increased in the face of it being a young herd from 432 kilograms in 2017, which was the last time we wormed the cows, up to 458 last year, which is in line with the genetics of the herd. And I will definitely use antibiotics if and when I need. Then on to my dung beetles then. This is an experiment we were trying out on last year. We were catching beetles and breeding them. So I mentioned earlier about the ferretic mites. You can probably see them here crawling around on the tops of these beetles. Those mites actually eat fly larvae, the nuisance flies. So and there's a train of thought that they might consume parasite eggs, but I'm not 100% certain of that yet. But they definitely do. They definitely do eat the fly larvae. So we're trapping beetles, and we took into breeding them. Now the problem is that this is quite laborious. So because of that, we had to revisit our ethics on the farm. And here was the help we got for the job. These work for snacks and fruit juice, and I find them quite efficient. So that's my son and my daughter working away there, digging out for a breeding cage. And this is one of the first ones we made with the field breeding cages for the beetles. And this is an indoor incubator type of system. Now, unfortunately, last year with the restrictions, I wasn't able to get my starter stock. This is specifically for the tunnelers, which I think have the most benefits to bring to agriculture. But I wasn't able to get my starter stock. Unfortunately, you could only get 1 or 2 beetles here and there, and I need a couple of hundred to get the thing rolling. With a group of other people there in the UK, I have produced this website called dungbeetlesforfarmers.com, and we were in Groundswell this year. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to travel, but you can see there that the following of people that seem to be looking at these beetles. It's creating a bit of traction. They are a really good indicator species. So if you have a good few dung beetles on your farm, you can be fairly sure that there's a good nutrient cycling system taking place on your farm. And also, if people think that dairy farmers are anti-environment, my own discussion group have recently been awarded an EIP for looking at this whole area, and we've gotten funding to do so. And it was embraced with open arms by the whole group. So that's me, and that's where we're at with dung beetles and parasite control. So thank you for listening, and maybe you can kind of get a grasp now on this whole feedback loop, and dung beetles are positive.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Really enjoyed your presentation, and very excellent messaging coming out of there, that there is a place there for nature-based solutions. And for me, I suppose we're really only discovering what nature can offer, really, aren't we, in relation to, and I suppose we have to be so cognizant of that when we are developing new approaches to farming approaches. So you've shared a website there that farmers can and anyone can log on to that to find out how they can support dung beetles on their farms. Is that sort of information?
Yeah. So the group that we produced is a very unusual group. We've an ecologist, environmentalist, a vet, a conservation farmer, and I'm the bottom rung of the ladder. I'm the dairy farmer in it. So it's a very balanced group. It gives a very balanced look at the problems and the solutions to increasing these species on your farm. So yeah, it's very comprehensive, and we're continually updating it.
Yeah, well, congratulations for bringing it to this stage, because there's many people that would maybe keep it as far as their own farm, but I mean, you're spreading the word, so that too is to be applauded. In terms of the research into sort of non-chemical control, do you think that there's enough happening there to support, because down the line, are we expecting that there will be less and less anthelmintics permitted or being used in agriculture? What sort of future would you like to see there?
Yeah, well, we are looking at a reduction in anthelmintics. So it's going to have to happen. Well, like we have the prescription, the HPRA are labeling as prescription-only medicines from next spring. So we have to demonstrate a need for using it now. So they're not any longer going to be seen as a control. They're going to be seen as part of the management from now on. So that's going to create a reduction. In terms of looking at the alternatives, there's an awful lot of snake oil out there and a lot of mixed messages. And yeah, we need to be looking at alternatives. There's no new products coming on the market. So we're really, in cattle, we've 3 products and we've 5 in sheep, and that's it. So we're not looking at any, new chemicals coming onto the market to control parasites. That's not going to happen. But the alternatives, Stockholm tartar for fly control, that works. It's just laborious. If we could come up with a solution for applying that a bit easier, it would certainly be a massive help. Grazing strategy, genetics, all these things lead into negating the need for using these products in the first place. So I think that's where the game is at. Yeah. We're not going to be able to. I don't think we need to look for silver bullet for a replacement for antibiotics. We have been looking at controlling these parasites in the animal itself, in the host, but now we're going to have to start looking at managing them out at the free living stage out on grassland.
Thanks, Bruce. The comment here and question, fantastic presentation and best of luck with the IP. Organic farmers have for decades spoken of the detrimental effects of certain wormers on other worms of the soil. The question here is, how does liming affect the dung beetle, or do we have any understanding of that?
Yeah, well, I haven't come across it at all, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. So I don't know. I couldn't see that there'd be any issue. They are they're quite tolerant to those sort of things. I know down in Australia they were actually washing the imported beetles with formaldehyde to clean them of any fungus. So I'd say I don't see that liming would be an issue, but I'm only guessing. I haven't seen any research on it.
Pat, lots of questions coming through there for Bruce.
Yeah, and I suppose a very practical one. You're down the line a little bit. What are the first steps that you would encourage other farmers to take on the journey to encouraging dung beetles?
That's a really good question. So I would say have a chat with your vet. Tell them you want to take a diagnostic approach to your parasite control on your farm, and incorporate using you can do fecal egg counting, milk testing, and every time you go pick up a bottle, have a chat with your vet and see can you work on reducing it. You'll be surprised the reductions that can be made in wormers when you start asking the question.
There's a question there, I suppose, given a higher level of activity and the integration of materials into the soils, is there a possibility that it will help with sequestration?
That actually, yeah, I came across that down in Adelaide. They were actually feeding dairy cows, biochar in their meal, and these cows went out to the paddocks then, and they were introducing a species called Teagasc vacca, which is one of those tunnelers we were talking about, and they were tunneling down the feces then from the cows containing the biochar into the soil. And they were measuring the level of carbon in the soil prior to and post introduction of these beetles after a number of years. It was a pilot scheme, and the farmers they're actually going to get paid there, which is a bit of an issue last week, as we've been hearing. But they're actually going to get paid for the sequestration of carbon into the soil down there, which is really good. So yeah, they do help. Yeah, even without the biochar, I'd have no doubt about it.
You talked about the 80-20, and you might just go back on a little bit on how exactly you're picking the 20. Is it purely on the basis of performance, or are there other signals that you're picking up on? Okay,
so yeah, look, the 80-20 rule, I'm actually not just dosing 20% of the herd or 20% of the calves. I would, it's different parameters. So you start weighing the calves. So I suppose firstly, look, reverse back a bit. We're doing fecal egg counts. When the fecal egg count goes above a certain level, that says to me my calves need to be wormed. And we go in then with weighing scales and weigh each calf individually going into crush. At that point, then we are looking at the average daily live weight gain, and we use EBI then with the predicted calf weight, and it's target based on that. And if it's not hitting both of those, it's wormed. And also, you would good stockmanship then as well. So if you have a calf with a wet tail or is looking a bit miserable, or even if they are hitting those targets, we would worm that calf as well. So our last visit there was 50% of the calves. That was the first one this year. 50% of the calves were wormed. It's going to be impossible to tell exactly the worm burden of each calf unless you go and do a fecal egg count for each calf, and that's not practical. The weighing scales is a really good practical way of selecting calves, and of course good stockmanship.
Bruce, we have a lot of interest around the traffic light system you spoke about, and how does a paddock go from a red paddock to a green paddock? Also a question here in relation to from the same person, is there any change in chemical sprays used on paddocks, for example, Roundup or chemical sprays for docks on the farm? Do these have an impact on dung beetles, do we know? So two questions there.
Okay, the sprays, I don't know. I'll be perfectly honest, and haven't come on any information on it. The traffic light thing, yeah, that's a really good question. So, if you're looking at a paddock that has a high worm burden on it, and you're assuming that it's high, if you come in with animals that like old dairy cows that shouldn't be susceptible to worms, if they graze it, they're going to hoover up a lot of the parasites and shouldn't affect them. The other way is to come in with a mower and mow the grass off and put it into bales or into the pit. Rest period is another thing. So if it's red in August or September, and that's not going to see animals for whatever reason or another until next spring, you can kind of assume that you could bring that back to an orange at that point, because the period of time between animals is going to affect, between grazing is going to affect the amount of infective larvae that survive in pasture.
The question there is there's a couple of mentions of the EIP. What is the proposal? What exactly are you going to be doing in the EIP?
Yeah, so we still have a good bit of ironing out to do in it, but we're taking a diagnostic approach to antibiotic usage and made a commitment to not use macrocyclic lactones on calves. So that there are two main areas, and we're looking at building shelters then for other insects around the farms, and we're baselining as well. So we're actually going to get a baseline. And there's one of the regrets I have on my own farm is that I didn't, before I started taking a diagnostic approach, I didn't actually get a baseline done on my farm to know what insects are there. I know there's more insects on my farm now than there has been for years, but I can't actually quantify it, whereas we're getting in an entomologist to do a wide scale, fairly wide scale representative baseline on the farms to decipher what ones we've there, so that we can show an improvement.
And is it all dairy farms, or is it that are going to be involved, or is it a variety of different types of farms?
No, it was a dairy farm, a Teagasc dairy farm group, and that it's born from that. So it's all dairy farms. Yep.
And a question there: is there much difference in the types of dung beetles that are found for different species and I suppose different grazing systems?
Yeah, there is. There's some species be very common. Some prefer sheep, some prefer cattle. Some will only be seen with one or the other. Some cross over, different soil types. There's a lot of different factors that affect them. the diet of the animal would have a big bearing on it as well. So, for example, like you might see as many geotropies in your typical dairy farm, but you would have an awful lot of species there called Aphodus rufipes. They seem to like the liqueous pats more so. So there's big variations in what you see where.
In terms of I just had a question here, Bruce, in relation to the economics of this. Have you seen any savings on your farm, or have you been able to quantify that?
To be honest, yeah, Mark, probably, but the issue is with Bruce stays asking questions and buying microscopes and building shelters. Every few cents that he saves, he spends back on it. So it's been cost neutral. But yeah, definitely. Like leaving the dung beetles aside, if you just take a diagnostic approach, you will make savings on antibiotics, and it doesn't happen. The big saving isn't in the first year. It's when those calves get up to being mature stock, because the quantity of stuff that we're using in dairy cows is phenomenal. It's if we can reduce that, that's when we start making money or start saving money.
Are there any other enablers that you think could be put in place to support this across the country? I'm just thinking in terms of policy or schemes, or I think some of the discussion groups or some of the department schemes have supported fecal egg counting in the past as well. But aside from that, are there any other things that you'd like to see happening there at that scale?
Yeah, there's lots we could do. So we have a lot of information in the country. We're just not recording it and collating it very well. Now, that's probably been a bit critical. We're not collating it as well as we could be. We've ICBF there doing a fantastic job in terms of genetics. If farmers took a diagnostic approach, recorded the information on the herd app, it's really easy to do. As we're I shouldn't have said herd app. I should have said farm software company, that goes into a database that ICBF could access. We would actually find bloodlines of animals that are genetically dispositioned to be resistant to parasites, and we're seeing that with the liver fluke peeping through, even though it's at the factory stage is probably a little bit construed by people using fluke control in the animals. So I suppose, look, particularly if we start a lot of us start using a diagnostic approach and weighing scales for animals, we will see the ones that are performing better when the feet hit the ground, and we can take those bloodlines and enhance those. So that's a particular area. The vets have a big job on hand, to be fair to them, and they need to be worked with. The farmers need to start. We don't want to be ringing our vets when we have a problem. We want to be ringing our vets when we don't have a problem. So we should be paying our vets for healthy animals, not paying them for sick animals. So farmers need to take a different approach, have a chat with our vets. That has been kind of with the knowledge transfer scheme that was on there a few years ago. That kind of did start off a few conversations, particularly around antimicrobial usage. But if that was enhanced upon and taken on board a bit more, that would be a big help. And then, look, industry should be getting involved in this as well. There's going to be less scare of maybe residuals of these products being around. So it's in their interest too. And I know down in Tasmania, the milk processors put in money into importing. It was actually an Irish species, the Geotrops spinacher. He's found in Ireland. They introduced him into a catchment area of a river to solve algal blooms. So the industry can have a big impact into what can be achieved as well. So they're kind of a few areas. I could go on for days, Mark, but
There's a question here. Do you see a potential for a side enterprise in breeding beetles and supplying them to colleague farmers?
Okay, yeah. Well, look, yes, probably, but the issue is the beetles, when you breed them like that, it's not a matter of buying them in a box, let them out, and job done. They will go out, if you're going to go out with your macrocyclic lactone, or your neighbour uses it, they're going to go and they'll be dead straight away. So it's not the answer. Like, the answer is in the grassland and the analytic management. So yeah, look, there's a certain call for, I think, those geotroopies, the tunnelers, for work to be done with them. Definitely that. There's probably other species. There's over 40 species in the country, so I wouldn't know them all, and I know exactly what ones are where. But there's the more diversity you have in the dung pat, the harder they work. So it's important that we have diversity. Yeah, it's not a silver bullet answer either.
The question there in relation to the dump paddock, and did you consider water connectivity in selecting your dump paddock?
At the time, no, but it's something we've talked about since, because at the time we started at that, we didn't realise that the most prolific antibiotic in that case, the case study that Trinity College did, was actually benzimidazole. I didn't realise that. I would have put my money on a macrocyclic lactone to be the most problematic, but it was benzimidazole. It's something I've been rethinking. All right. Yeah. So yeah.
So could you just remind us, Bruce, again of the website, because there's quite a few people just wondering.
Yeah, so it's www.dungbeetlesforfarmers.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
BEE.
Yes.
Opposed to BEAT.
Yeah.
We'll just share that in the chat for everyone. Sorry, Pat.
No, in terms of the milk recording and the results from the milk recording, there's just a question as to how that operates and what kind of results are you getting, and how do you relate those to action?
Okay, so the important thing with these results, this is why I say talk to your vet. We're not doing individuals. Sorry to state that we're not doing individuals for milk recording for ostratagia readings for parasites. So the interpretation of results is very important. So if you're seeing a high reading in ostratagia levels in your milk, it might not actually mean that that's disease. I saw mine there this year was moderate enough. I was getting a little bit concerned, maybe I do need to go, maybe I don't. This was a bug tank reading, and we had an unfortunate incident completely unrelated to disease. That we lost a cow in the yard here, and last month. So we got a rabomycin from the processor and sent it into the lab for analysis, and there was no signs of any ostratagia in the animal. So that put my mind at ease, saying that we haven't got a problem there with that worm in particular. The interpretation part of it is that, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the test. It was 100% perfect. I have no problems about that. But it's telling me that the animals have become exposed to the ostratagia. So if you have particularly a lot of young stock in a herd, they're going to show up with higher readings than older animals as become exposed. You just have to be very careful about interpreting the results.
There's a question there in relation to workload, and I suspect you're probably not the best person to ask it in terms of the workload you put in, but taking a farmer who takes on this approach, I presume there's positives and negatives, less time dosing, but a lot of time put into other elements of the process. Where do you see the balance? Is this something that could be a time negative or time neutral for a farmer. In other words, not going to mean a huge amount of extra effort to do, I suppose, the right thing in a lot, or if that's the way you want to put it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So in terms of the physical stuff, so you're going to herd your calves once a day anyway. So, once every 2 or 3 weeks, take a fecal egg count. It's not that big of a job to do. You're not catching calves to do fecal egg counts. You don't do that. You take a pooled result, take a pooled sample of a number of fresh dung pads.
Yeah. So
that's not an issue. Post it off to the lab. In terms of actually dosing, you're spending less time dosing. So you're saving time there in that regard. And look, the dosing process takes a little bit longer because you're weighing. To be honest, probably should be doing that anyway. It's beneficial to a dairy farmer to get his dairy stock up to target weight by using as little inputs as possible. So you're being more measured with performance then. So if you need to intervene with concentrates or not, then you can make that decision based on the performance of them. Management end of it, there is a bit more than that, and you need to be just look at the likes of traffic light grazing. It takes a little bit of what's the word, discipline, I suppose, just to fill it out as you're going along. It's not that big of a job to do. We have it on a clip chart thrown in the truck. So it's just when you move the calves, just mark it. I suppose moving the calves, look, as it said, your calves will perform better in a system where they're not exposed to heavy worm burdens. So you're going to gain from additional performance from the animals by moving them more regularly. It sounds a bit earnest in moving calves every 3 days, but if you have a field set up, you just move a tape in front of the calves once every 3 days. It literally only takes 10 minutes to do that. It's just when you go move from one field to another, that takes a bit longer, obviously, but we'll be doing that anyway. So, yeah, look, I suppose maybe time is probably neutral, long and short of it. Yeah.
And I suppose a final question, just in terms of you talked about dry and wet there right at the beginning, the impact of weather conditions, drought, very wet weather in terms of dung beetle populations. Is there are they impacted, or do they merely go on their way regardless of weather?
Yeah, well, look, I know water table has an effect on the tunnelers, but after that, I'm not really sure. But I did notice when I was catching beetles last year, you would think that you would catch more in the dry weather, but it was just after the rain that I caught my biggest catches. I'd be going out to the traps expecting to see nothing in them, and they'd be full of beetles. Just after a night's rain, for example, you seem to get a lot of beetles. So I don't know overall what effect the rain would have on populations, if that's the question. But the appearance of them seems to follow a fine day after a wet day.
Okay, we're unfortunately we're right up on time. Pat, did you have a final comment there?
No, just we watch the space with the EIP and hope that you keep the information flowing out of that through the websites that you have. So I presume that's the plan.
Really inspiring presentation and an innovative project, Bruce, and continued success to you and your colleagues and the EIP group. And like Pat said, we really would love to get an update maybe down in a year's time or so when you have maybe some outputs from that. But thanks for your time this morning and excellent presentation. Reminder to everybody that we will be joining you next Friday with an update on the Agricultural Sustainability Support Programme. And so we'll have Noel Meehan and Joe Crockett, Noel Meehan from Teagasc and Joe Crockett from Dairy Sustainability Ireland to discuss that. And we do look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks to our production team, Andy Boland and Yvonne Maher. I'm going to be taking a few weeks of a break, so hand you into the capable hands of Pat, and I think Porrick is going to be assisting you as well, Pat, and so I look forward to seeing you all hopefully with a bit of a refresh at the end of August. So with that, we thank you.
You still have to come in on your Friday morning, though. You couldn't leave us without watching us. You'd hardly trust us that much.
I don't think my mobile broadband will be good enough now where I'm going, Pat. So I'll be trying to switch off as much as I can. But I hope it goes well for you.
Right.
Okay, Bruce, thanks again, and Pat, thanks for helping with questions this morning, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, folks.